And thank you all for attending the AMSAT Forum today. First of all, it's going to be difficult to follow Richard's presentation. The story he has is certainly very compelling. I'm going to give you an overview of what's happening with AMSAT, and then of course following me will be others talking about some of the technical areas that are happening within the organization that I'm sure you'll find interesting. I have on the screen here a list of the board members that are currently on the board of AMSAT, and I point this out for two reasons. One is the board members are on two-year election cycles. We do have a board election coming up this summer. The 2009 class, if you will be up for election again this year. I'm aware of at least one individual who is not planning to run for the board this year. So I would encourage any AMSAT member who's interested in serving on the board of directors to consider running. The Hamvention is a great place because in order to be nominated you have to have 5 signatures. So if you're an AMSAT member and would like to talk to me about whether or not you might want to consider running for the board, please don't hesitate to do so. Keep in mind we are looking for new blood. I put asterisks upon 2 names, Gould Smith and Bill Ress, because those people were new as of the last election. Gould joined the board in 2008, and Bill Ress, N6GHZ, is the board alternate. He attends all board meetings, is fully participating in all discussions, but he doesn't have a voting position. But again, whoever does not make the board, the next person with the most votes becomes the board alternate, and that alternate is fully engaged in the conversations of the board. In terms of the organizational structure, I was elected by the board to be president at the October board meeting 2008. These are the positions that are considered to be the senior officers. A couple of changes which I'll list on the next page. Of course, I'm the new president. Another new position is VP of Human Spaceflight. Will Marchant took over from Frank Bauer this past March after Frank's extensive leadership as our VP of Human Spaceflight. We have several open positions, VP of Engineering, and we'll talk about how we're handling that right now, as well as VP of Marketing, and we don't have a VP of Executive Vice President right now. In terms of what AMSAT accomplished in 2008, I'll go through this quickly because it's relatively old history. Of course, we know about ARIS and the school contacts and Richard Garriott's flight, which Richard was kind of to talk about. P3E and international cooperation, I'm going to show you a separate slide on that. AO51 we'll talk about later this morning through Drew's presentation. AMSAT presence at major hamfests and conferences. Dayton, of course, is an example of that. If there are AMSAT members here that are aware of hamfests that we are not at, please don't hesitate to suggest to Gould or I where we might want to have a presence, assuming, of course, we can find the volunteers to do that. The AMSAT lab is an issue this year. ITAR I'll talk about in a minute. The AMSAT store and internet presence, we now, of course, have had the AMSAT store on for the second time for the past few months. That's become a very successful endeavor for us. It's amazing how many people want to make store orders at 2 o'clock in the morning on an impulse buy, so to speak. So having a presence and having the AMSAT store there has been a major significant benefit for us. We also have an AMSAT Information Management System development program going on right now. The membership files are being maintained right now in a DBase 2 file that Tom Clark wrote back in the 1980s. So it's time for us to basically update and upgrade our information systems to take advantage of the technologies that now exist. And we do have a system now up and running. It'll be putting beta test or retest in the next month or so. We hope to have this online to help us move into the 21st century in our membership. And then, of course, volunteer database, expanding the talent pool. We do need volunteers to get involved. We are working hard to try to encourage newcomers, that is, newcomers to positions of responsibility, to take on those opportunities, give an opportunity for them to contribute to the organization. People, of course, are very interested in what's happening with Phase 3E. Phase 3E is an AMSAT Germany project. They do not have a launch right now that at a price that they can afford. They're in a fundraising mode. And you're going to hear about fundraising as a developing issue. It's been a continuing issue for all the AMSAT organizations and the various things that they want to do. Right now, AMSAT DL is in a fundraising mode. They're trying to convince some German government officials that their P5A mission to Mars is worthy of their governmental support. And they're hopeful that if they are able to get that P5A funding, that will provide the funding for the launch of P3E. The connection is that P3E is going to be a test bed. Some of the technologies they want to put on P5A are being flown on P3E. We as amateurs benefit from that because it will be a high Earth orbit amateur satellite as well. But the justification for building P3E in the eyes of AMSAT DL is the fact that it's going to be a test bed for some of the technologies they want to put on P5A. As I note here on the slide, it's about 75% complete. They've had some issues with their lab. They're now in a smaller lab, but they do have a lab that's their own. And they are in a position right now to complete the satellite if and when they can find a launch and they have the resources to complete it. In terms of Eagle developments, some good news and some bad news. First of all, how many people here were at the AMSAT Symposium in Atlanta last October? There were a few of us. This is a very similar slide presentation I gave then. This is basically an update. AMSAT went through a process of, I'm going to call it upheaval. Some significant management changes happened within the organization in 2008. It started basically a year ago, in July of 2008, where our Vice President of Engineering resigned, and that basically put the engineering department in turmoil. The advanced communications package, ground station development came to a halt, and all that work that was being done basically ended for the time being because of some significant organizational upheaval. To add to that turmoil, we have been going through a very difficult situation with the AMSAT lab. You'll recall that in 2006 we signed a memorandum of understanding with the University of Maryland Eastern Shore and with the Hawk Institute for Space Sciences in terms of putting the lab in Maryland. And our goal was to have a relationship with the university that would help us with our educational outreach, provide a home for the AMSAT lab, and be able to build and develop things in Pocomoke City. Unfortunately, things changed, and one of the changes that took place was that HIS went from a nonprofit situation to a for-profit situation. That changed the relationship significantly, and therefore what our goals were no longer compatible necessarily with their goals. So we've been going through a court battle, if you will, in terms of retaining our assets and trying to find a way to remove ourselves from the lab situation that we're currently in. A month or so ago, a convoy of volunteers went down there. We got authorization finally to get our, what I'm calling AMSAT assets out of the lab. They're currently in storage in a facility owned by a person who's being a benefactor to AMSAT, about an hour away from the old lab. But the clean room itself, which I believe measures about 20 by 20 feet, is currently still at the HIS facility. And we are going through a process right now involving lawyers in terms of getting authorization to go in and remove the lab. So that has been a very stressful situation for AMSAT. It's not been a very pretty picture. It's just added to the turmoil that we've gone through the last 12 months. We're now in the process of trying to secure an AMSAT lab new home. And we are talking to various institutions about the possibility of moving the lab. We have nothing that we can publicly say at this point. We are still anxiously looking for a home. So if you're aware of any particular universities or institutions that are having an evolving space program that you think might be a good potential fit for AMSAT, please don't hesitate to contact me and let me know what your thoughts might be. We are having conversations with various institutions, but right now there's nothing of substance that I can report. So again, we're looking for a home to put the clean room in order to find a new home for the AMSAT room, the AMSAT lab. On the slide I mentioned that we're rebuilding the engineering organization. We're basically in the process of refining what we expect out of our engineering department. We do not have a VP of engineering right now. On another slide I'll show you that we're looking really perhaps at a different situation now with our VP of engineering, the traditional role versus what we think we need to do in the future. And of course, as I said, we're actually working for finding a new lab situation, which also has an impact on engineering. Then in terms of what I'm calling some good news, we did have some conversations with Intelsat. We publicized that 2 years ago. In the past year, we did have an NDA assigned by us and by Intelsat to talk about the feasibility of putting an AMSAT package on Intelsat. We got some initial drawings that gave us some idea of what the property was, if you will, how much real estate we would have access to. But then things again sort of evolved. K3IO Tom Clark did develop for us a proposal to fit the available space, and we were looking at the planned impact of the placement of that package on the satellite. The reason we were looking at this is that by placing a rideshare on someone else's satellite offers us some significant benefits. It's a simplified development effort for us. We're focusing on communications packages, not the entire satellite system. And of course, being in geosynchronous orbit, we would have continuous coverage, which would help fulfill our emergency communications mission. It was certainly an excellent way to get into space, and it may be, in many ways, a most cost-effective option for us to focus on engineering of communications packages rather than being concerned about satellite systems overall, propulsion, battery regulation, power, internal housekeeping, and the like. But even so, this is still not a cheap way to get into orbit. We were talking about multi-million dollar investments to be able to convince Intelsat to allow an AMSAT to ride on their spacecraft. Those conversations basically came to a halt because of the realization we didn't have the money to pay up front to Intelsat the money that they would expect for us to put our property, if you will, on their satellite. And just to put it in reference, about 2 weeks ago I saw an article in Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine where the Australian Defence Ministry signed a $160 million contract to put a communications package on an Intelsat for military purposes. So think about the asset base that the Australian Defence Ministry has versus the asset base that AMSAT in North America has. Clearly, there's a big imbalance. That is why we really haven't had much serious conversations in the last year about Intelsat. They had a paying customer that was much more attractive to Intelsat. Last October at the symposium, K3IO did present his rideshare proposal, and that was the starting stone. It didn't necessarily end up on an Intelsat idea, but it did get us thinking about the significance of rideshare and what we might want to do in terms of looking on down the road. So first thing we did was since we didn't have a VP of engineering, is we put together an engineering team, a task force, if you will, to look at options for AMSAT. Where are we right now in terms of our capabilities? What do we want to see in terms of what options are out there in the world in terms of potential launch opportunities? Who's building satellites? What kind of relationships can we establish and the like? So they are, in fact, going through that process, as you'll see in a minute. Again, this slide emphasizes the fact on fundraising. We have to raise the dollars, not only for satellite development or rideshare payload development, but also paying for actually getting into orbit. And we also have to develop, particularly after what I'm calling the implosion of what happened last year, we have to develop credibility with ourselves, with our membership, and with potential outside donors. We have to be able to demonstrate that what we're saying we want to do, we're capable of doing and can actually fulfill it. So we have an AMSAT engineering team developed. It's being led by Bill Ress, N6G8Z. Drew Glassbrunner is here, KO4MA, he'll be talking a little bit later. Tony Montero, AA2TX, Lou McFadden is also here, and Tom Clark, who unfortunately could not be here at Dayton this weekend. And so what we're doing is they use K3IO's proposal as a starting point, and then came to the recognition that modularization is a strategy we need to pursue. The idea being that we pre-build and have available assets that upon the moment's notice we can potentially place on a rideshare opportunity. If you think about the development time for us to develop our packages versus the lead time we would have for finding a launch, we would be up against a very critical time juncture. When we did AO10, AO13, P3D, we knew years in advance that we were going to have a ride opportunity, and we built satellites accordingly. In today's commercial world, satellite operators or satellite launch operators are signing contracts with satellite builders 12 to 18 months ahead of the launch. You know, someone's building a satellite, they negotiate a launch opportunity with a launch provider, and we then find out about it 12 to 18 months in advance. That's not enough time to build a satellite from scratch. So we've come to the recognition we have to get things built in advance. We have to develop the technology in advance. And then we have an opportunity, we have to be opportunistic in terms of actually jumping into the opportunity and having something available on time for launch. So we're in the process of developing that modularization strategy, and they're also helping us to sort of develop what kind of engineering budget do we need to have, and once we've come to the conclusion of what needs to be built. At the same time, the world is changing in terms of how things are being done, even within the amateur radio community. Again, AMSAT may not be necessarily the technical lead in terms of developing new technologies that end up having subsequent space application. So what I've here on the screen is the recognition that there are small teams out there that may be doing their own thing that may in fact have future AMSAT potential down the road. And so therefore, they're not an AMSAT-led organization. They're not necessarily people who are thinking immediately of space opportunities. They're developing the technologies on their own. And an example that may evolve that way is with software-defined radio. SDR has certainly significant potential for space, but it may be small teams that are out there doing things under other organizational structures that at some point may want to come to AMSAT and say, we think we got something you guys can use. So when we think about the next VP of engineering, we don't necessarily are looking for the guy that had the most technical prowess, the technical kahuna, so to speak, the guy that knows everything. What we may need, in fact, is somebody who can work within a team environment, can work amongst a diverging crowd, if you will, people all over the world or around the country, and may require a different set of skill sets, project management more than being the technical kahuna in terms of evolving what becomes our engineering product produced by AMSAT. Another factor that's been a major concern for AMSAT is ITAR, International Traffic in Arms and Regulations. ITAR has been a significant impact on not only AMSAT, but every satellite builder that's out there in the United States today. From the State Department perspective, satellite construction is dealing with munitions. So there's regulations as to what we can do in terms of conveying information with foreign nationals and how that affects us. Of course, we've had a long tradition of working with foreign AMSAT organizations, particularly AMSAT DL and AMSAT UK. And we were involved, of course, with P3E. There were some major subcomponents of P3E that had an AMSAT NA stamp on it, including the CANDO bus, the SDX, the software-defined transponder, and the IHU-3. Were all products, if you will, being developed not only for P3E, but for AMSAT's use in Eagle. And suddenly the realization came to us that perhaps maybe what we were doing in an open source environment may be in conflict with ITAR. And ITAR is serious business. People go to jail, people get fined, and so consequently the volunteers ended up with a fear of ITAR and basically quit work in terms of working with foreign nationals. Clearly from an AMSAT perspective, not working with foreign nationals is a real problem. So we went in and we actually went through a process of voluntary disclosure with the State Department outlining what we did in terms of past experiences with P3E. They came back to us and said, yeah, you violated ITAR, but we're going to close the books. We're not going to prosecute, just don't let it happen again. So the next step is we have to have a meeting with the State Department. They told us we violated ITAR, but of the list of things we submitted as self-disclosure, they didn't tell us which ones were violations and which ones were not. So we are now going to be following up with the State Department. We're trying to get a meeting set up with them to go through the actual disclosure application we gave them and see what exactly were issues, and then see if we can potentially work out an exemption or some sort of agreement as to how we can work with our foreign AMSAT partners and can go back to working with P3E and working on future projects as well. I want to make one other comment because we're running out of time. The mission statement of AMSAT has changed in the last year as well. We're now saying that we, of course, operate experimental satellites in remote space. We have our partnerships. We have our technical and scientific innovation, training and development. We are now deploying satellite systems with the goal of wide area and continuous coverage. We are not talking about the idea of a date. You know, date was 2009, the original vision statement. Clearly, that's not going to happen. We also come to the realization that high Earth orbit is one avenue to reaching our goals. There are other opportunities out there as well. Low Earth orbit, middle Earth orbit, rideshare opportunities and the like. And clearly the cost of projects is driving much of our ability to get things done. There are plenty of opportunities for volunteers to help AMSAT. I've just listed this here. Some of you who have seen this in the AMSAT Journal. It's basically a want ad looking for people to step forward and volunteer. I want to encourage anybody who wants to participate in our projects and participate in a variety of areas of the organization itself. We need your help. In terms of 2009, I'm just going to go through this real quick. We've already talked about this. SUSAT, you'll hear about this later on, so no need to talk about that. Talked about the modularization approach. Talked about the AMSAT lab. Encompass Educational Initiative has a lot to do with the lab. We have to have a location where we can push our educational outreach, because our educational outreach is where fundraising can in fact be successful. Outsiders are interested in education and science. They're not necessarily interested in our ability to communicate with Japan. So the way we want to raise funds is through educational outreach. One last thing I want to point out, and that's the 2009 AMSAT Symposium, our 40th anniversary, which is taking place the weekend of October 9th at the BWI area, at the Sheraton there. Please, if you can make it, please join us. Not only will we be talking about 40 years of success for AMSAT, but also talking about the future. You're certainly more welcome to join us, and there's information at the booth about the upcoming symposium at BWI. Thank you very much.